Alright guys, how's it going? This is the second and final part of my hardware debunked video. Now, the cause of the current issue is my series on the Con Lake. As a reminder, this Con Lake video 6 months ago, just after the launch of Coffee Lake, I basically made 2 points in this video. The first point was that some reviewers tested with multi-core enhancement on, effectively giving the 8700K a free overclock up to 4.7 GHz. This part was proven conclusively by one of the victims of multi-core enhancement, Steve over at Gamers Nexus. His numbers here prove conclusively that some reviewers got motherboards which defaulted to multi-core enhancement on, therefore giving Intel a free overclock. Steve in particular was a real victim of this because the motherboard that Gigabyte gave him not only came with multi-core enhancement as default, there is no way to disable that in his review sample. He is probably correct in saying that this is more on the motherboard guys than it is on Intel, but Intel aren't going to be passing up free performance either. That's how I see that one. The second part about the Con Lake was how I simply did not believe Intel's TDP numbers and that some of their chips would never be able to hold those clock speeds on certain motherboards. Now I just said cheaper B&H motherboards. And 3 months ago this was confirmed, again over at Computer Base, when they tested the Medion Eraser OEM PC, an i7-8700 and GeForce GTX 1070. And here we can see the same CPU performing 15% slower than their review sample 8700. Computer Base's testing showed why. Their i7-8700 could only hold its maximum turbo for around 15 seconds, at which point it drops down to 3.6 or 3.7 GHz. So that's why this 8700 underperformed on this motherboard, which was actually a Z370. The whole point here was, of course, you're getting less than you expect, because reviewers who got an i7-8700, like Computer Base, tested on the high-end motherboard without power limits, higher-end cooling. They got much better results. That was the second part of the con. Now, I did err in that video by railing against the i5-8400, and I actually pointed that out in the Con Lake confirmed video when I said, with hindsight, I should have gone for the 8700 because that was the easy choice. As it was, I did not like the way that a lot of reviewers fell for the 8400, and I especially did not like that 2.8 GHz base clock speed. But all through this whole Con Lake thing, Steve over at Hardware Unboxed again has been responding to my videos, going as far as wearing a tinfoil hat 2 months ago, where he tested various Coffee Lake CPUs with different coolers, and apparently this was enough to wear a tinfoil hat and debunk my video. By this point, I was getting pretty sick of it. But not long after that video launched, Steve private messaged me on Twitter again and said, Jim, I found something that you're gonna love. And what he had discovered was yet another Z370 system that was unable to hold the same boost clocks as the desktop boards, so pretty similar to what Computer Base found with the Medion Eraser. However, a few hours later, he got back to me and said, just ignore that, he was wrong and it works fine. Obviously, I was pretty intrigued by that, but I never heard anything more about it until 6 weeks later, when Steve launched this video. Core i7-8700 Intel box cooler limiting performance. Now, when I saw this coming into my inbox, I had a pretty strong suspicion about what I was about to see, and on watching the video, my suspicions were confirmed. Now, in this video, Steve was reviewing the ASRock Mini desktop, which did come with a Z370 motherboard and an i7-8700. And in this video, Steve referred to the Computer Base article on the Medion Eraser, the one where we already saw the 8700 underperforming by around 15%. And this is what Steve said.
With those results in the back of my mind, I moved on to test the ASRock Desk Mini, and honestly, I was expecting to find a much better result. But what I got was a much worse result. Out of the box, the Desk Mini was scoring just 1127 points, and that's a further 6% reduction from the Medion PC.
An even worse result than what Computer Base got on the Medion Eraser PC. 1127 Cinebench? That is way down on the 1384 points or so that Intel says this CPU should provide. Now, I instantly knew the reason for this, and it came back to the whole Con Lake thing. The i7-8700 will never be able to hold anywhere near its maximum boost clock in many of these OEM systems, because it will be configured as a 65 watt TDP CPU. And that is exactly what Steve found.
So I started to dig into why this was. I quickly realised that the Desk Mini was configured for a maximum package TDP of 65 watts.
These OEM systems generally have cheaper motherboards in them, because that's a way to cut costs. And when you're using cheap components, the last thing you want to do is run a ton of power through them.
So, does this mean the 8700 is simply too power hungry and will require a higher end Z370 motherboard to achieve maximum performance? Well, turns out the answer is actually no, and I'll explain why. Using the XTU software, I decided to see what the ASRock Desk Mini could do with the limits removed.
Wait, let me just stop you there, Steve. You used the Intel Extreme Tuning utility to remove the power limit? Should you not also have mentioned that doing so voids the product warranty? As we can see in the warning here, product warranties may not apply if the processor is operated beyond its specifications. Where did we hear that before? Oh yeah, it was over at Computer Base and their review of the Radeon Eraser, because after they figured out that the i7-8700 wasn't performing as expected, they contacted Radeon, who told them that, according to the Intel spec, the CPU has a TDP of 65 watts, and that is the performance the motherboard provides. And sure, there are some gaming motherboards with a Z370 chipset that can provide higher TDP performance, in which case this CPU will then achieve higher clock rates, but will operate outside of its specification. The point here is that downloading the Intel Extreme Tuning utility, voiding the product warranty, these are things that the average buyer of this kind of PC is never gonna do. They're gonna get out of the box performance some 20% lower than what some reviewers have shown in their reviews of the 8700. That, to me, is a con. And this here, Steve, was your big chance to get on board. The problem is, with all your tinfoil hats and all your other debunking, you have now got yourself boxed into a corner in complete denial of anything wrong with the con. The video you did before this one, you tested a bunch of coolers with the 8700K and said, the 8700K works fine with any cooler. In this one, you've removed the power limit, discovered that after you do that, this crappy boxed cooler introduces thermal throttling, and now you're saying it's actually the cooler. In every case, it is the motherboard TDP limit, which is what I said in the original Con Lake video. Cheaper motherboards limited on power. There is no way these CPUs will get anywhere near their maximum boost clocks. Go watch it again. And having just admitted that I may have got it wrong with the i5-8400, I found this next part of your video a little bit curious too.
At this point, I started to wonder what the Core i5-8400 would do using the 95 watt configuration, so I threw it into the Desk Mini with the box cooler and ran some tests.
What you really should have done there, Steve, is wonder what the i5-8400 would do out of the box at the 65 watt configuration. I don't know for sure, but I'd be quite surprised if it ran at 3.8 GHz on all cores. 95 watts, sure, of course it will. But at 65 watts, what is the real out of the box performance for that i5-8400? Well, if complaints start coming in about underperforming i5-8400s, this power limit throttling would be my first bet. That one remains to be seen. Now let me just point out, Steve, that up until this point, I had pretty much ignored everything. I ignored the new information on the i5, I ignored the tinfoil hats, I ignored the fact that you appear to have manipulated one or two results in your 2500K FX review. But after I launched my last video, which was Con Lake Returns, the Golden Sample 8700K's video, I finally ran out of patience when I saw this video from you 5 days ago. Did Intel cherry pick 8700K review samples? Part 1. And of course we then got part 2. After I launched this video, I paid very close attention to a number of things, and one of those things was your response. And I noticed a comment you had made on your channel, responding to a viewer when you said, "I'd ask you to ponder something, mate. If you ran a store with the sole purpose of selling CPUs guaranteed to hit certain frequencies, and you were charging a massive price premium to do so, would you advertise the fact that most chips hit those frequencies? Hey, most 8700Ks hit 5.2 GHz, but we are charging 100% markup to guarantee it. Are you interested?" Now, you were of course talking about Silicon Lottery. And I guess in some way your point does make some kind of sense. Because yes, Silicon Lottery could make money out of pretending these chips were rarer than what they were. People like exclusive things. They like to feel that they're buying something very rare. So yes, Silicon Lottery may well have been lying about the rarity of these CPUs. And obviously I wanted to know the truth about this too. At the bottom of this thread, another viewer says, "Steve, you really shouldn't be doing this, accusing these de-lidding companies of not being truthful." Where you responded, "Look, I'm not accusing them of anything, just saying be open to possibilities." Before continuing, look at the business model, not saying they aren't honest, I'm just saying probably not the best source, especially when you choose just one. Now, I didn't actually choose just one though in my video, I chose two. I showed a second source, which was Der Bauer's chips over at Case King, and here we can see multiple 5.2 GHz chips with fairly high prices, the kind of high prices you would expect from a rare CPU. Now, looking at Silicon Lottery today, compared to what it was before my video launched. Remember there used to be a 5.3 GHz chip there? Well, it's no longer there now, and in fact it has not returned since my video. What's more, the 5.2 GHz chips have been sold out every single day except one since I launched this video, and the reason for that is simple. After my video launched, Silicon Lottery, and probably Case King as well, sold a lot more of these CPUs than they normally would. Only one day since launching has Silicon Lottery had the 5.2 GHz chip back in stock. Let's go over to Case King, click on their banner. Not a single 5.2 GHz chip in stock. They've only got 5.1s, 5.0s, 4.9s and 4.8s. This has been the case since my video launched. They have not got a single 5.2 GHz CPU. Over at Overclockers UK, you can get 5 GHz. They don't have any 5.1 GHz. They don't have any 5.2 GHz. Only the 5 GHz. Can't even get the 4.9s. Also interesting over at Overclockers was this. If you click on this, now this 5.2 GHz is their top bin, as you just saw. Scroll down a bit. Not a single CPU is created equally and all perform differently, with less than 5% being able to perform to our highest guaranteed frequency. Overclockers are saying 5.2 GHz is a top 5% chip. They appear to be so rare over at Case King, they don't even have a stock unit for it, and they're constantly sold out over at Silicon Lottery. Now you might remember though, Silicon Lottery said the top 22% of tested 8700Ks were able to hit 5.2 GHz, and the reason for that is likely because Silicon Lottery's bins are actually quite loose. 1.425 volts, that's quite a lot of voltage to be putting through one of these chips. This is how Silicon Lottery's business model works. They're not lying about the rarity of these chips. They get more into this highest bin by being pretty generous on the V-core. Now this is maximum, remember, so in order to pass their 5.2 GHz bin, the chip must do 5.2 GHz stable at 1.425 V-core maximum. The obvious question here, Steve, is if most 8700Ks are hitting 5.2 GHz, and all of this has just been some kind of ruse, these de-lidding businesses pretending these chips are much more rare than what they are, then how exactly does that business work when you can't get one in stock? Should Silicon Lottery not just be selling these 5.1s as 5.2s? You're talking almost $200. They're constantly sold out. They've got none at Case King, and I haven't seen any at Overclockers UK for a very long time. So when I saw this in my inbox, that was the final straw for me, because given what had gone before, I had lost my trust in what you were telling me, Steve. And in fact, I was prepared to buy all 10 of these CPUs off you, and I would have shipped them to Silicon Lottery had you got the results that by this stage, I was pretty sure you would find with these 10 overclocked CPUs. Now as it works out, some of my faith was at least restored, because while watching through this video, it quickly became clear that the quality of your 10 retail samples were far below the quality of the qualification samples sent to you by Intel and ASRock, who of course got that chip from Intel. Both of those qualification samples reached 5.2 GHz, whereas only one of your 10 retail samples did. You did however get 6 retail samples reach 5.1 GHz, and comparing that to Silicon Lottery, that looks pretty high. Way more should have been 5 GHz compared to 5.1. But on closer inspection, out of all of these 5.1 GHz chips, only this first one here would actually pass Silicon Lottery's testing. And the reason for that is 1.380 volts at 5.1 GHz. Looking over at Silicon Lottery, their maximum V-core for their 5.1 bin is 1.412 volts. So retail sample 2, 6, 7, 8 and 10 would not have passed Silicon Lottery's binning. So these would probably have made the 5 GHz bin. And what happens when you do that? Well, simply put, your numbers almost exactly mirror Silicon Lottery's. The vast majority of the chips should make 5 GHz. That's what Silicon Lottery said. The top 88% of tested 8700Ks. Now, of course, they de-lid to help the temperatures. And while you're not de-lidding, your temperatures were very high and you are using a $360 liquid cooling system. While watching through this video, it became clear that you became resigned to the probability that Intel and ASRock did indeed hand you a couple of ringer CPUs. The body language and everything just told me, and you mentioned it yourself.
Whether or not Intel is cherry-picking review samples, honestly, I still don't know. I got lucky for sure.
So what I'm going to say now, Steve, is try to do something that you clearly have never done yet, and that is put yourself in my shoes. See this video here, the golden sample 8700Ks? I came up with this idea after reading of just 1 or 2 people too many getting really poor overclocks on their 87Ks. So I put a ton of research into this, came up with the idea of using Silicon Lottery and others and figuring out whether or not the tech press got similar results, and we already saw that they didn't. And after after you tested those 10 CPUs, you changed your mind again. Basically now saying that the reason why reviewers got higher overclocks is because they don't test stability anywhere near as well as these other companies do. Companies like Silicon Lottery and Case King, they don't want returns back. They need to make sure these chips are stable. Reviewers really don't. I was well aware of this before I launched my last video. But like I said, Steve, you put yourself in my shoes now and consider this. After I realised that something was going on here, I had three choices. I could have ignored what I discovered. I could have rounded on the tech press for not doing proper testing, or I could blame Intel for handing out ringers. I had to do one of those three. Now, you said that you wouldn't respond to this video, but see, if you do respond to this video, then I would like you to tell me what you would do when presented with those three options. Do nothing, blame the tech press, blame Intel. That's what it's like to be in my shoes. And you always complain to me about how hard your job is as a reviewer. Well, that's how hard my job is as an analyst. Tell me what you would have done in that situation. As you said at the end of your video.
But with 5 GHz looking almost guaranteed, assuming you have a good motherboard and cooling, then it's hard to see what all the fuss is about.
You don't really see what all the fuss is about. Well, that's where you and I differ, because I see no reason whatsoever to give Intel a single megahertz more, let alone 200 megahertz more. So just as a quick recap, the tech press loses the plot. FX did indeed close the gap on Sandy Bridge. I have proven that over multiple sources, and I have shown why your results did not quite fit the rest. Tomb Raider, all that testing, I was right. It was an NVIDIA driver issue. The i5 is dead. Well, the quad-core i5 certainly looks to be dead. As far as future-proofing goes, it certainly seems to be the case. And regarding the Coffee Lake con job, MCE was proven. The 8700 has been proven twice now in the only two OEM systems we have seen. The 8700 cannot get anywhere near its maximum boost clock. And downloading Intel's XTU so you can remove the power limit, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't wash with me. And while I would really like to know how that i5 8400 performed at 65 watts too, I'm just gonna drop this one for now. Simply put, Steve, you have been really unfair on me over this past year, and this is why this video exists today. I don't have access to the hardware to prove you wrong, but I can prove you wrong using your own videos, and that is what you have forced me to do today. And you know what I'm gonna do next, Steve? I'm gonna forgive you for it all, and here's why. And all of you AMD fanboys watching this, pay attention, because this is the most important part. Everything I have shown here today would make you believe that Steve is an Intel fanboy or an AMD hater, because in every case he's been defending the Intel product, in some cases against the AMD product. You might think that's an open and shut case, but the truth is actually much different. Steve could not give a damn about Intel, Nvidia or AMD. He's just a guy trying to do his job. And he does not like being wrong. It's not about defending Intel, it's about defending Steve. And when all you AMD fanboys watch my videos and then go spam links at him, being aggressive, accusing him of shilling for Intel and Nvidia, Steve fights back the only way he can, by proving you wrong. That's absolutely fine. Sadly though, that requires the debunking of my video to do that. The problem with that is, it only works if I'm wrong. I don't get these things wrong very often. So this has led Steve to have to, well, let's just call it bend the rules a little bit in order for his point to be right. There was never any chance of me falling for that. I just let Steve away with this for months because I did not want to cause him this problem. But like I said, I just couldn't take it any longer. And now I am faced with the reality that you AMD fanboys are gonna go and give Steve a bunch of hell for this, because you stupidly believe that this is about Steve's love of Intel and hatred of AMD. That is just a pathetic belief. I know who the good guys are in this industry, and I know who the bad guys are, and Steve is actually one of the good guys. But you fanboys, you could turn them into one of the bad guys. And here's a really important part of this. I used to be an AMD fanboy. I no longer am an AMD fanboy for various reasons. But when I took a massive dump on Vega last year, I soon learned that a lot of my so-called supporters, they weren't really supporting me. They were supporting the company they loved, and they turned on me en masse when I took a dump on Vega. Now here's me, supposedly the biggest AMD fanboy in the press, taking a dump on Vega, and the AMD fanboys simply could not handle it. They turned on me, and you know what I did? I just took another dump on Vega, and I continued to dump on Vega, and then I started dumping on AMD even more and more, and it started becoming clear to me what the real problem here was with AMD and the press. Guys like PC Perspective, why do you think they can't stand AMD? It's because they cannot stand you AMD fanboys. They have had to suffer you so long that they basically now hate on AMD AMD because of you. Does that sound very productive to what you're trying to achieve? You had me hoping Vega would fail, and I started looking for every little thing, proving that Vega was gonna fail. If you fanboys can do that to me, what do you think you're doing to guys like Steve who aren't AMD fanboys? It's clear you don't give a damn about me or my channel. You only care about your precious AMD. Well, if you really care about AMD, then you need to understand that your actions are harming this company way more than they are helping. This is why AMD has such a terrible problem with the tech press. It's because of you guys. So don't bother going over and harassing Steve about this video, because this video isn't about AMD either. It's about me defending myself against Steve, who had to defend himself against you. Steve is simply trying to do his job. I am trying to change a broken industry. And some of you guys need to learn the difference between what is helping us and what is hindering us. Right, so I'm done with this one. This is either 1 or 2 videos, I'm not sure. If it's one video, it's probably 50 minutes long. So chances are I've split it in 2, which would still be 2 very long videos. I do not want to waste more time on this crap. I am done with Con Lake. Unless an i5-8400 turns up with a very low clock speed, I will not be touching this subject again. As to what happens next with the channel, maybe I'm going to have a talk about that as well. In the meantime though, check out my links in the video description, my Amazon links, that kind of thing. Don't forget to like and of course subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you later guys.